Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. We're diving into a topic today that's a little different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a little different from our usual explorations. We're used to thinking about warning signs for big, dramatic stuff, right?
Right.
Like natural disasters,
Yeah.
market crashes, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But what about the warning signs that are closer to home? The ones that can really sneak up on us in our relationships.
Yeah.
That's what we're here to unpack, and it's all thanks to you.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You reached out wanting a deep dive on this Inklestred text you found, which seems to be like a guide or excerpt on unhealthy relationships.
That's right. You're exactly right. It's about recognizing those often subtle red flags.
Yeah.
And you're also right to point out that this can be a sensitive topic. So our main goal today is to just equip you with some helpful knowledge and insights from the text,
Yeah,
not to play therapist.
exactly.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
Right.
Okay, so digging into this Inklestred text,
Okay.
there's a whole section titled Varningstecken,
Okay.
which basically means warning signs in Swedish.
Oh, okay.
And one thing that might surprise you,
What's that?
it doesn't jump right into the dramatic stuff like physical violence.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Interesting. It's almost like the guide is saying,
right.
hold on, there's a whole lot that usually happens before things escalate to that point.
That's a great way to put it. It talks about how physical violence, if it happens,
Right.
is often preceded by years of psychological and economic abuse, which can be hard to spot because it's often disguised as something else.
Absolutely. And those early warning signs can be
Right.
so subtle, they might even seem normal at first, which is what makes them so dangerous.
Yeah?
You know?
Okay, so hit us with some examples.
Okay.
What are we talking about here?
Well, the guide mentions seemingly small things like
Okay.
what might seem like isolated incidents can actually be part of a much bigger and potentially dangerous pattern.
Right.
And one of the things the text highlights is that men with very rigid views on gender roles are actually 4.4 times more likely to be abusive.
Wow, 4.4 times.
Yeah.
That's huge.
There it is.
And it kind of makes you think about how societal expectations can play a role in all of this.
It really does. It's not about pointing fingers or placing blame,
Right.
but it does highlight how deeply ingrained certain beliefs can be.
Right.
And how important it is to examine those beliefs and make sure they're not leading to harmful behaviors.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So we've got these subtle but consistent warning signs, and the Inklestred text is urging us not to brush them off as no big deal.
Right.
But then things start to escalate.
Yeah.
What happens as these behaviors go beyond just words? Okay, so we're past those initial red flags, and now things are getting more intense. What does the Inklestred text say about how those behaviors escalate?
Well, it gets in some pretty specific examples that go way beyond just words, think constant monitoring of the partner's phone and the social media trying to control their finances, or even making threats towards the partner or their loved ones.
Oh, that's just straight up scary. It's like the abuser's trying to take complete control.
Exactly. At this stage, it's all about power and control through fear and intimidation. The Inklestred text really drives home the point that any threat of violence, no matter how small, should be taken extremely seriously. It's a major red flag and a sign to seek help immediately.
Absolutely no question about it. But you know what really struck me was the section on varningssignaler, or din kropp, basically warning signs in your own body. It made me realize that abuse isn't always about those obvious outward actions. It can be about how the relationship makes you feel.
That's such a crucial point that the text even gives these really relatable examples, like feeling afraid to go home, dreading conversations with your partner, feeling constantly on edge. These are all signs that something is seriously wrong.
Totally. We've all felt those things to
Yeah.
some degree, right? Like maybe not in a relationship, but in other stressful situations.
And here's the thing, there's a scientific reason why those feelings are so important. Chronic stress, especially the kind that comes with an abusive relationship, can actually mess with your brain function. It can literally impair your memory, your impulse control, even your creativity.
Whoa, seriously, it can impact you that deeply.
It's true. Our brains are wired to focus more on threats than rewards. So even if an abuser has moments of kindness, it doesn't erase the underlying harm being done. Our brains just don't process it that way.
That is mind-blowing. It's like your brain is on high alert all the time trying to protect you from the next threat.
Exactly. And the longer you're in that state of hypervigilance, the harder it becomes to function. Normally, it's exhausting and incredibly damaging.
Which I'm guessing is part of the abuser's plan, right, to wear you down.
Absolutely. And that leads us to the next section of the Inklastrad text, where it lays out these 5 areas that abusers will often target. And the guide makes it very clear this is not random, it's a calculated way to break down the victim's sense of self.
Okay, I'm super curious now. What are these 5 areas, and how does attacking them give the abuser more power?
Well, the guide refers to them as position status, certainty, independence, fairness, and belonging. It's like the abuser is going after the very core of who you are and what makes you feel safe and secure.
So basically all the things that make you, wonder it's so effective, it's like slowly chipping away at someone's foundation until they crumble.
Exactly. And by constantly undermining those 5 areas, abusers create a situation where the victim feels increasingly dependent and powerless, which unfortunately makes it even harder to leave the relationship. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah. Okay, so let's break down these 5 areas a bit, because I think this is where things could really click for people listening. Give us the rundown of how this plays out in a relationship, starting with position status.
So attacking someone's position or status could look like constantly criticizing them in public or in front of family and friends. It's all about diminishing their standing in the eyes of others.
Oh, that's just cruel. Making someone feel small and insignificant, especially in front of people they care about.
Exactly. And then there's certainty, which ties back to that controlling behavior we were talking about earlier.
Right, so like always keeping the victim guessing and on edge.
Exactly. It's all about keeping the victim off balance, never knowing where they stand. One minute, something's okay, the next, it's not. It creates this environment of constant anxiety and fear of doing the wrong thing.
Which, of course, plays right into the abuser's hands, because then the victim becomes afraid to assert their independence or stand up for themselves.
Exactly. And that takes us to the third area. Independence, the abuser might restrict their partner's access to money, control their every move, or even try to dictate who they can and can't see. It's all about stripping away their autonomy and making them completely reliant on the abuser.
It's just so manipulative and devious. And what about fairness? That one seems pretty self-explanatory, but I'm guessing there's more to it than meets the eye.
There is the Inklastrad text talks about how abusers often engage in double standards and what's called gaslighting. It's a psychological manipulation tactic where the abuser twists situations to make the victim doubt their own sanity. They might accuse their partner of doing the very things they themselves are guilty of, or flat out deny things that the victim knows to be true.
It's like they're trying to make the victim question their own reality.
Precisely. And finally, there's belonging, which is all about the fundamental human need for connection and love.
Which, as we talked about earlier, abusers exploit by isolating their victims, making them feel like they have nowhere else to turn.
Exactly. They might try to turn their partner against their friends and family or make them feel like they're nothing without the abuser. It's heartbreaking, but it's a tragically common tactic.
This is all just so heavy. It's like a masterclass in manipulation. And it's hard to imagine how anyone could escape this kind of situation once they're caught in it.
Well, that's where this concept of normalizing comes in which the Inklastrad text also discusses. It basically means normalization in English.
Normalization, you mean like how something that's completely unacceptable gradually becomes, well, normal.
Exactly. It's a survival mechanism that victims often develop in order to cope with the ongoing abuse.
Wow, so it's like their perception of what's normal and acceptable actually starts to shift because of the abuse.
Exactly. And the Inklastrad text highlights 3 key indicators of this normalization process.
Okay, I'm listening. What are they?
Okay, so the first indicator is the erosion of personal boundaries over time. The victim's sense of self just kind of gets chipped away little by little until they're not even sure what they believe or what they want anymore.
It's like their own inner compass gets totally thrown off course.
Exactly. And then there's the enforced isolation we've been talking about, which makes it even harder for the victim to recognize what's happening or to reach out for help. They're cut off from the people who care about them and might be able to offer a different perspective.
Yeah, it's like being trapped in a hall of mirrors.
Yeah.
Where everything is distorted and you can't trust your own reflection.
That's a really powerful way to put it. And then the third indicator, which is particularly insidious, is emotional manipulation.
You mean like the whole cycle of abuse and then kindness?
Exactly. The abuser might be incredibly cruel and controlling 1 minute and then turn around and be charming, apologetic, even showering the victim with gifts or affection.
It's like that classic manipulation tactic, right? Like, oh, they didn't mean to hurt me. They were just stressed or having a bad day or not feeling well. But those moments of kindness don't erase the pattern of abuse.
Exactly. But they can make it incredibly difficult to leave because they offer this glimmer of hope that things might change. And because our brains are wired to focus on those positive moments, it can create a really confusing and painful cycle for the victim.
Okay, so this is all incredibly heavy stuff.
Hmm.
And I know we've been focusing mainly on understanding the dynamics of abuse, but I have to ask, if someone listening right now recognizes themselves in any of this church, what can they do?
First and foremost, if any of this is resonating with you, please know that you're not alone and it's never your fault. There are resources available to help you break free from this cycle.
Absolutely. But knowing where to start can feel impossible when you're in the middle of it.
You're absolutely right. That's why this deep dive, and honestly, even just acknowledging what's happening, is so important. Just like the Inklstrad text emphasizes, knowledge is power. And from there, it's about taking small steps to reclaim your sense of self and your safety.
So what might those small steps look like?
Well, it could be as simple as starting a journal to track your feelings and what's happening in the relationship. Sometimes just getting it out of your head and onto paper can help bring some clarity. Or it could be confiding in a trusted friend or family member, someone who can offer support and a listening ear.
Those are such good points. It's
Yeah.
about rebuilding those connections and that support system that the abuser has tried to isolate you from. It can be scary to break the silence, but it's so important.
Exactly. And if you're not ready to talk to someone, you know there are hotlines and support groups where you can connect with people who understand what you're going through. You can even find many of these resources online, which can be a way to start exploring your options without having to reveal your identity.
That's so helpful. And I imagine there are also resources specifically for developing a safety plan for leaving an abusive relationship, especially if there's a risk of violence.
Absolutely. There are organizations that specialize in this, and they can provide guidance and support every step of the way, from finding a safe place to stay to navigating legal and financial matters. They've got you covered.
This whole conversation has been such an eye-opener. And you know what? It makes me realize that recognizing these red flags, these patterns of abuse, isn't just about romantic relationships.
You're absolutely right. These dynamics can play out in families, friendships, even in the workplace. Abuse of power can happen anywhere.
That's a really important point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we all have a responsibility to educate ourselves about these issues, not just for our own sake, but for the sake of the people around us. Because the more aware we are, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves and support those who might be struggling.
I couldn't agree more. If this deep dive has sparked even a little bit of self-reflection, a desire to learn more, or the courage to reach out for help, then it's served its purpose.
So well said. And hey, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed after this deep dive, don't worry, that's totally normal. This is heavy stuff. Just remember, you're not alone. And sometimes just listening is the best first step. Thanks for taking this journey with us today.